Perhaps the most fascinating, to me at least, chapter in your book was on Tibet and the centrality of Tibet at the heart of the India-China conflict. And, for people who may not know, this is a fascinating read which traces back, Ambassador Saran, how the India-China conflict can actually be traced back to a face-off all the way back between Tibet and Ladakh. Aurangzeb setting in, later Maharaja Ranjit Singh stepping in as a character, and all of this sort of, in a sense, growing the roots of the modern day conflict. Now, one of the intriguing points that you seem to make by allusion, you don't quite see it, is how the offer of exile to the Dalai Lama, the much loved the Dalai Lama, perhaps was the root of the gravest problems. Do you think this was a mistake? And I mean, I love the Dalai Lama, so this has nothing to do with his personal popularity. But speaking completely from a strategic prism, do you think it was a mistake?
Yeah. So I have great reverence for His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And let me say straight away that we do not think that it was a mistake giving shelter to Dalai Lama when he went into exile. Because not doing that would be contrary to everything that India stands for. So, a nation's sense of itself is also very important. And I think for India to have closed the doors to this very highly respected figure, I think would have been completely out of line in a sense with, as I said, what India stands for. Having said that, you see, it is not the case that skirmishes were not taking place on the border before 1959. There were minor clashes at various places. And if you look at the Chinese archives, what you find is that during this period, Chairman Mao's directive to the People's Liberation Army of China was, don't be provocative. If there is an encounter, make your point and you step back. Do not let this become a kind of a war between the two countries. At a certain point, he even says a certain kind of jigsaw pattern has emerged on the border. That there are places where we are behind the Indian lines and the Indians are, behind our lines. So even if there is this jigsaw pattern, do not make this into a bigger conflict. What changed after 1959 was that what was looked upon by the Chinese as somewhat minor differences, which were easy to overcome, after 1959, these became like a kind of a strategic, threat. That India was actively trying to undermine Chinese rule over Tibet. So it became a kind of a issue of, Chinese sovereignty over a very sensitive part of its country being challenged by a substantial part, and perhaps even being assisted by other adversarial parts.
But given that nations are guided by self-interest, was it in India's self-interest to offer His Holiness the Dalai Lama this exile?
I do not think that it is always possible to sort of reduce these kind of, narratives to just merely real politics. There are ethical dimensions, there are moral dimensions to foreign policy as well. Sometimes it is not possible to respect those moral dimensions or ethical dimensions. But to say that you should completely put that aside, and only look at it from a very narrow sort of self-interest point of view, I'm not so sure that is the right approach. May I just say that the important thing is that it could have been handled differently. Differently how? Because, knowing that there was this kind of sensitivity to what was seen as what India was doing with respect to Tibet, could it have been handled at a much more low key? Could it have been handled without making this into a major public issue? Perhaps it would have been difficult to do that, but still, would an effort to try and say assuage the concerns on the Chinese side? After all, Prime Minister Nehru was in touch with Zhou Enlai all the time. could have an effort been made to try and really assuage Chinese concerns about what Dalai Lama's, exile in India would mean, or that India would not try and take advantage of this particular situation.